You've asked for me to talk about my background, my education, and some of the things that were important in my own life that eventually led me to Tennessee State University. And I think that to reflect upon these things makes me think about first having been born in a place called Hope, Arkansas in 1940. And if those of you who can calculate these dates, you will know that I am 71 years old. I was born December the 26th of 1940 in a place called Hope, Arkansas. I attended the school system in Arkansas for a while, but my father was also a member of the United States military, armed services, and very early in my education career, we were able to move from place to place with him, sometimes in Texas, other times in Georgia, and other places. In a real sense, eventually as my family grew, and eventually we represented about 9 children, 5 boys and 4 girls. And we moved around with my father from place to place, almost literally all over the world. We were in a place called Chaumont, France. We lived for a while on the Azores Island, and I was fortunate enough to have completed school as a military dependent in a place called Verdun American High School in Verdun, France in 1959. That after I had completed the 11th grade in another European school, military school, that was called Kaiserslautern, Germany. And so we had an opportunity to see quite a bit of the world, but in a real sense, we really were not able to absorb most of the world that we saw at the time. And we were not successful in terms of our academic performances in any of these areas, especially in the high school situation that we found ourselves in when we attended school at Verdun American High School in 1959. I say that primarily because in all of these instances, I could be said to have been the only African American there. You see, most of the children of these military personnel, they were referred to as dependents at the time. Most of them were white, and the only time that we had a real opportunity to deal with that portion of our career was probably during the school periods. But most of my time was spent dealing with military personnel, with soldiers who were about my age, younger soldiers who had just enrolled in the United States Air Force at that time. And I sort of moved around with them when I was 16, 17, 18 years old. And we finally came back to the United States in 1960. And coming back to the United States in 1960, I lived in a place called Hope, Arkansas. And in 1961, after having tried a number of jobs, there were just a whole variety of jobs that I became involved in. None of them required any skill, primarily because I didn't have any skills, and primarily because I was in a place where African Americans were not given that much of an opportunity to do anything other than menial tasks and whatnot. And so I guess I, in a real sense, worked for whoever wanted me to work, and worked for the price that was available. The resume would include something that was called catching chickens, and I often talk to some of my students about catching chickens, and they really don't understand about the whole process of catching chickens. But in doing so, you have to ask yourself, how in the world did the chicken that I had last night reach my plate? And what we want you to know is that those chickens were grown in a large chicken house if you worked for Tyson, and that was the chicken place that we worked for. And we had the responsibility of going there in the early twilight of the evening, about 6 or 7 o'clock in the summertime. And this was the time in which darkness fell, and when you went there, you went into one of these chicken houses that had more than 5,000 chickens, and our responsibility, about 8 or 10 of us as members of this crew, was to go in and literally put these 5,000 to 7,000 chickens in this particular house into crates that would hold 8 chickens. And so we would systematically go in from dusk almost to dawn the next morning trying to get all 5,000 of these chickens out of the chicken house. And that was a real experience for me. And another experience I had was one of being a termiter. I worked for an individual who was an interior designer, and he had just a whole variety of other things that he was involved in. And I, in a real sense, was his helper. And I helped him lay tile floors. I helped him termite, which is to say that in the old houses and in the old days, the termite man simply had to go underneath these houses, remove all of the wood, primarily all of the chips that might have been left after the house was built, primarily because termites would get into these chips and eventually find their way into the floor and eventually eat the floor out. And so it was my responsibility to go in and rake out all of the wood chips and spray and to make the house safe. And I later found that he was paying me $1 an hour. And sometimes I would stay at the place of employment for at least 8 hours during the day. And since he was paying me $1 an hour, I developed a method of what I considered at the time of earning my pay without doing that much work. And so what I would do in the first hour, I would go under the house and I would take the wood out, and for the rest of the day I would go back under the house and sleep and do anything else for the rest of the day. And as far as my mental understanding was at the time, I was able to do